You know, if they come back and say, I really don't use them in my teaching, that pretty much ends the interview because I'm not going to pursue an interview with someone who... Hi, good afternoon. I'm Bob Choate. I'm the Senior Director of the Flight Instructor Academy here at Thrust Flight, and I've been teaching Flight Instructor Academy for over 8 years, 4 of them here at Thrust Flight. I've actually graduated over 500 students from the Academy. Most of them are now with the airlines or in corporate aviation. And I'm joined today by...
Hi, I'm Megan Lindholm. I am one of Bob's former candidates. I also was an Assistant Chief Flight Instructor here at Thrust Flight before moving on to that first officer position at the regionals. In today's video, we'll be talking about the 6 hardest parts of becoming a flight instructor.
And so time commitment is something we want to talk about as being one of the hardest things we do.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, whether you go the one-on-one route or the academy route, you've got to put in the time, and that can be hard with a full-time job. Maybe you just need to take a little vacation from work if you can't completely separate from your job, but you've got to put in the practice, not only with the knowledge, but the skill of teaching. You know, that's something that you haven't previously done, just as maybe a commercial pilot, but actually being able to teach the topic and practice teaching. It seems like something that would be easy to do, you know, just be able to teach someone something that I already know, but you actually have to practice teaching to someone so you can get that feedback.
So that's so true. I mean, when I look at the time commitment of a flight instructor, there's a couple of big things that you're really dealing with. One is, how do I move physically from the left seat to the right seat? So there's a certain physicality in there and what I'm looking at, how I train my hands to work opposite of what I'd been trained as originally as a left seat pilot. The second one is a mental transfer. It's the transfer from being a good student to being a good instructor. And that's the part that really requires the time commitment. Hopefully, listening to this will give you some preparation in terms of the kind of time you need to put into it to make it a career or make it a good transition for your future career in the airlines. You know, the next thing that comes to mind when I think about flight instructors is the role of the FOIs. I know that when I interview flight instructors, one of the questions I ask is, what is your experience or what are your views on the fundamentals of instruction? You know, if they come back and say, I really don't use them in my teaching, that pretty much ends the interview because I'm not going to pursue an interview with someone who doesn't understand how the fundamentals of instruction play out in their instructional career.
Yeah, I agree. I think the FOIs can seem like a daunting task. I think that's probably one of the harder transitions to being a CFI because it's all brand new information. It's not just learning more in depth about an engine, it's learning something completely new and maybe something you've never really used before if you don't have any experience teaching. But I think if you focus more on the reasoning behind each topic and not just memorizing the words, it starts to kind of make sense. You know, how can I really help someone teach if they're plateauing? How can I tell if a student is struggling and how can I cater something to them? It really just makes sense. It's not just memorizing the words and the acronyms for the topic. It's just kind of understanding how to really teach someone to help them be successful. And the DP doesn't want to just see that you've memorized it to get through it. They want to see that you're going to be a good instructor because having those FOIs, like a good understanding of it, will help set apart a good versus a mediocre CFI to be beneficial to the students.
Yeah, well said. When you take your CFI practical test, first hour to hour and a half is devoted to fundamentals of instruction. And if you can't get through the fundamentals of instruction and demonstrate your knowledge of those and how it would help you facilitate transferring learning to a student, then you're not going to get any further with that test. The test will stop until you can get through those FOIs. You know, so the next hardest way to become a flight instructor occurred to me, it's really the perception of your own piloting skills and knowledge. Now, this isn't a discussion about overestimating your abilities, rather it's a description of a trap that it's easy to fall into. And here's how the trap goes. So I must memorize and be able to discuss those FOIs, and I must be able to articulate all of the items that I consider hard. And then when it comes time to take the exam, I fail on the simple things. Well, what's going on there?
Yeah, again, like you said, with the FOIs, that's a new topic, so maybe we focus too much time on that. And we know we've passed the commercial checkout, so we know we can do the maneuvers, but putting in that time to practice teaching those maneuvers, right? Even the simple things. Like a lot of times we'll take students up on a 2-year sign-off flight and ask them to teach us how to do straight and level, and they can't really articulate that to really help us understand what that means.
So one of the ways we help with that in Academy is not only do we practice teach a variety of topics, but we really break the class into teams so that they have a set of study buddies and to go back and forth to practice not only the articulation of some of this, but also how to draw it on the board or a white piece of paper. You know, we can fall back on the FOIs. We're just simply talking about using block practice, repetition, and experience to hone your skills so you're ready to go in for that practical exam.
Right. It's hard to do it alone. That academy point that you pointed out, I experienced that when I went through academy. This was back in, I think, the end of 2020, so it was all on Zoom. And so I didn't really have that in-person take on the academy, so I didn't really have like the study buddies like you're saying. And that is so essential to really helping you get through a CFI, because if you can practice in front of someone and get their feedback, that's invaluable information. I've also heard practicing in front of a mirror or recording yourself, because sometimes you don't realize how many times you say
yes.
or so, or it's just like awkward the way you're trying to explain something, so that can really benefit yourself as well.
Well, I think you nail that. So my thoughts, I think, on commitment to standards is, think about it. If you're in your practical exam with the FAA, they're evaluating you, and one of the things that I think they'd appreciate hearing is that you will never sign a student off for any license or rating, practical test, written test, until you are certain that they have met the standards for the appropriate rating or license and that you're confident in their skills. There's nothing worse than walking along back and forth in front of the hangar 30 minutes after your student was due back from the cross country, and you don't want to be that instructor.
Right. Standards. It's more than just the flying. So you look at the ACS and it gives you instructions of kind of what to talk about with these certain topics, and also gives you standards for the maneuver as far as heading altitude, things like that. But on the ground, let's think about a private pilot, you know, they need to be able to know how to plan and interpret a nav log. So if the CFI is simply using a GPS, the student's not really going to get the background understanding of how those numbers came to be. How did they get the true course, the true heading, or the magnetic heading? How do we know how that came into the GPS? We can't just copy those numbers onto a paper nav log and say that's okay. I've seen stage checks where sometimes I'll ask them, how did you get this number? And they say, well, I copied it from my last nav log. It's like we need a little bit more understanding, even just at the private pilot level.
Right, and as a flight instructor during your exam, that's what the DP will be looking for. The next one I was thinking about was professionalism. Professionalism, say, what's so hard about professionalism? Well, there's a lot hard. It's not that you simply apply a rote list of standards and you're automatically a professional. Rather, you have to work at it.
Right. You know, it's kind of something that's earned. You know, you get this title of being a professional based on the way your peers perceive you, the way your students perceive you, and it's really about going above and beyond, really being committed to that student and their success, really showing you care about that student's success, right? You don't just show up to work and then go home and your job is done. You know, you might get late night texts from a student asking you questions about a check ride, asking you questions about a certain topic they don't understand, a maneuver, and they're expecting you to be committed to them because they're paying you a lot of money. They really want to be successful, and you're a big part of that, and you're going to share a lot of milestones with that student, especially private pilot going through solo, check ride, stage checks maybe. It's a big deal, and it goes beyond just what they talk about in the FOIs about physical appearance, the way you talk, kind of how you walk, how you talk. It's more than that. It's about being committed to that student and really contributing to their success.
I like what you said. I particularly like the thought that to be recognized as a professional is something that you've earned. And I think that's correct. And when will you know? Well, don't worry. Your students will tell you, your chief pilot will tell you when you're a professional. And you'll feel it as well. You know, I think of the 6 hardest things to become a CFI, I think the last one is probably the most important, and that is you really have to step up to safety. You know, as pilots, we all know about safety, right? We know how to pre-flight an airplane, we know how to run up an airplane, we know how to check the weather. All that knowledge you gained as a commercial or private pilot, instrument pilot, flows very nicely into becoming a CFI instructor. But it's not, but I would say this stuff is where you get caught with regard to safety. I think there's some hard stuff that we have to talk about a little bit.
Right. It could be something little, like you know, you're going out to pre-flight the airplane, like you said, and maybe you find a document is expired or an inspection is expired, or maybe there's a dent in the wing you're not sure about, and you need to make sure that you are safe during that flight so you bring both yourself and your student back safely. So it's, what do you do in that situation? Well, you need to evaluate, is this a safe airplane to fly the day? Is it legal? And then maybe decide, is there something else we can do instead?
Sure, I think that's a great example. Let's pull it over to the IFR side of the house for a minute and You've got a student, IFR student, he needs 2 more hours of instrument training to be signed off for the practical exam. His flights have been great, his skill is excellent, and it's an IFR day. And you look at the weather, you discuss with the student, and lo and behold, the weather is below your personal minimums as an instructor. What do you do? My advice is that when in doubt, err on the side of safety. I know as a flight instructor teaching instruments, I would not fly if it was below my personal minimums because I was not sure that I could keep the student safe. And I hope you'll follow the same logic path as you move into your instructional career, especially on the instrument side. There's really only one chance to be safe, and that's in all the activities you take and the thinking you do before the flight. If something happens in the flight, it's your professional experience and responsibility and knowledge that gets you through the day. If you're talking to your DPE during your practical exam and you're talking about professionalism, I'd like to add safety. That you'll be a strong proponent for safety, you'll represent safety to that student, and you'll teach safety as part of being a professional. I really view that as being part of professionalism and hope you take that away with you.
Well, that wraps up today's video of the 6 hardest things of becoming a CFI. If you have any questions, feel free to leave comments down below. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos.